When I heard my mom screaming, I assumed that our neighbor's cat was chewing up Mom's precious garden again. However, when I left my room, I didn't understand anything I was witnessing. My mom was on the verge of collapsing, and I could barely keep it together. At first, I thought that I was seeing a ghost, but what I saw turned out to be very real. Standing on our porch was my sister, who had been missing for the last 5 years. Lily was 2 back then. She went out with my dad, but he returned without her, saying that she had been kidnapped. He left her alone in the car for just a couple of minutes while he went to buy her some candy, but when he returned, she wasn't there. And today, here she is, standing right in front of us. She simply disappeared, and after a year of searching without finding any leads, her file was closed. Some people said that she must have died, whereas others thought that what happened to her may have been a lot worse. My mom blamed my dad for her disappearance and could no longer stand living with him. So they separated. During that time, my dad couldn't care less. He married another woman, and they moved into a big, lavish house. We didn't even know that he had enough money to buy something so luxurious. After this, my mom really started going downhill. Her sadness over my sister never left her. A lot of times, she'd even call me by my sister's name. It was such a horrible time, and I was being torn apart seeing my mom like this. Lately, my mom had been acting even more strangely. She started following the news every day. She even took out my sister's photos from the old albums and hung them up around the house, in the living room, the kitchen, her bedroom, and even mine. She kept on telling me that she felt that my sister was going to return, and that one day the news was going to mention my sister's return. My mom was on the verge of going crazy. She no longer went to work, and she didn't allow me to leave the house, not even to go to school. She ignored all the calls she received and locked all the windows and doors, all because she heard a story on the news about a gang that had been arrested for kidnapping kids for ransom. But I wasn't even a child anymore, and it's not like we owned anything that might tempt the gang. Hope returned to her once again after she read some stories about families that were reunited with their children after they'd been missing for a year. But come on, my sister had been missing for 5 years. We had to accept the reality of it all and move on. But it didn't stop there. My mom's fear of me being kidnapped was killing me. I was no longer allowed to go outside because she feared that the same fate would happen to me. I totally understood where she was coming from, but I couldn't take it any longer. I wanted to live my life like other kids my age. Was I asking for too much? Once, my friend Leah threw a party and she invited all of our friends. I wanted to go to this party more than anything else in the world. I begged my mom over and over to allow me to go, but she refused. So for the first time ever, I snuck out. I told my mom that I was going to sleep, and then I put pillows on the bed. I covered them with my duvet so it would look like I was lying under there. This way my mom would think that I was fast asleep. I was sure that my plan would work out the way I wanted. At the party, I felt anxious at first, but then I quickly relaxed. After exactly an hour, my mom was standing right in front of me. I couldn't believe this woman. She wouldn't even give me space to breathe. She made me leave the party with her. Everyone was looking at us and whispering. I even heard one call my mom a lunatic. All the way home, she kept yelling at me and lecturing me, but I couldn't handle it anymore. I yelled in her face, "Enough! Can't you see that you're keeping me locked up like a prisoner? This is not the life I want for myself. If you want me to stay with you, allow me to live, or else you won't see my face ever again." She didn't reply. She just slammed the door and locked it up as usual, imprisoning me. The following day, I started hearing rumors spreading about me and my mom. The worst one was that I'd run away with a guy who was 30 years older than me because my mom didn't allow me to date him, and that the police returned me home and locked him up because I was still underage. And since then, my mom hadn't allowed me to go anywhere. I mean, can you believe that? It is all Lily's fault. If she didn't disappear that day, my life wouldn't have turned into such a nightmare. You might think it couldn't get any worse, but you'd be wrong. I had nowhere I could run to. I only had my mom, who'd turned crazy, and my dad, who was living with his wife. Me and my dad, well, we didn't exactly have a good relationship. I never saw him except for at Christmas. He usually got me a gift, and we had hot chocolate in some cafe. Then he disappeared until the next Christmas rolled around. I thought maybe if I went to my dad and convinced him to let me stay with him instead of in the prison with my mom, my life would get better. You might think that sounds selfish and ungrateful, but hear me out. I seriously needed his help. I mean, my mom wasn't a normal person anymore. I decided she needed actual medical help. She was losing it. The next day, I snuck out of the window. The window was quite high up, and I never really thought it through. I hurt my leg when I jumped, but at least I was still able to walk. It was pitch black outside. My dad's house was only 3 blocks away, so I decided to walk there, even though I was scared. It was the first time that I'd ever walked alone at night. I kept imagining a car stopping and kidnapping me. Okay, I know what you're thinking now. All those ideas had been put there by my mom, and well, look what she'd done. It had worked. I was officially terrified. Though when I arrived, I wish I hadn't even come. I wasn't welcomed at all. My stepmom kept me on the porch and didn't even let me into the house. I sat shivering in the cold for more than an hour, waiting for my dad to arrive. When he finally did, I thought that he'd at least ask me why I'd come here. But what he did made me hate his guts. He started shouting in my face, telling me he didn't need any more problems and that he didn't want the police entering his house thinking he was a suspect. A suspect? But why? I'm his daughter. It wasn't like he'd kidnapped me or anything. But when he tried to take me home, the police surrounded his house, handcuffed him, and took him away. That night was one of the longest nights of my life. I spent hours in the police station answering a lot of weird questions about my dad. What am I doing with my dad at such a late hour out of the house? Did my mother know that I'm with my dad, or did he ask me not to tell her? Why was my dad dragging me into his car? Where does he want to take me? But the weirdest thing was that the policemen began to ask me questions about my lost sister. I mean, how was that even connected to me running away from home? I never imagined that it was possible to actually miss being at home with my mom. In the morning, my mom came to take me home, but she refused to tell me what was going on. She hugged me tightly and said, "I am happy I didn't lose you, too." I didn't know back then what had happened with my dad. I thought that it was my mom who'd called the cops and reported me missing, and that the police arrested my dad for being their first suspect. For once, I was grateful for my mom's overprotectiveness and crazy behavior, especially when she got worried about me. My dad got what he deserved for treating me so badly. But through tears, my mom told me that she hadn't reported anything. She didn't even know I was gone until the police called her. Suddenly, everything felt strange. My mom allowed me to go back to school, but this time I was the one who wanted to stay home. In that moment, I finally understood my mom and realized that I had no one else in the entire world. More than a week went by, and I still didn't know anything about my dad, and I didn't even care until I heard my mom yelling. I went outside to see Lily standing on the porch with 2 police officers and a couple I'd never seen before. It was my sister. I was sure it was. She had exactly the same facial expressions, but she looked older. The photos hung all around the house were hers. She even looked like me. Had my sister really returned after all these years? But how and why? And who were the couple next to her? My mom couldn't contain herself when she saw my sister. She literally passed out. We moved her to the bed and called the doctor, who in return gave her some sedatives. During this time, the police stayed, sitting with the man and woman, and of course my sister. I asked them to explain what was going on, and they did. One of the policemen told me that a while ago they'd arrested some members of a gang who'd kidnapped children and sold them to people who couldn't give birth. And my dad had been a member of that gang. That's right. Because of his greed, my dad not only hurt a lot of families, he also sold his own daughter, his own flesh and blood for money. What kind of a father would do that? How could someone be so heartless? As for the couple that accompanied the police, they were close friends of the family who bought Lily from my dad. No one knew that she wasn't their daughter. Everyone had been deceived. However, the family that had bought Lily had died in a car accident, and after interrogating my dad, the police were able to find all the other children who had been kidnapped by my dad. The family insisted to be with my sister when she returned home so they can apologize to my mother about all the pain they had caused her. I'm not sure whether my mom will ever accept their apology, but I knew she was glad her daughter had finally returned home. This story sounds like the plot of some insane movie, right? But unfortunately, it is true. After my mom calmed down and collected herself, she didn't even care to hear the whole story. All she wanted was to hug my sister again. It is hard for my sister to understand everything that happened. She is barely 7 years old, but at least she is safe with her real family now. What do you think of my story? Crazy, right? Please share your comments and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to this channel for more stories.